about, whether it be targeted businesses or workforce participation. In prevailing wage compliance, I don't want to discount prevailing wage compliance because, there's been a number of instances where we found discrepancies in what people have been paid, and they've been, issued supplemental pay for that. And so that's an important part of the accountability process that's interjected with our compliance work. So we're happy to provide you that level of detail. We certainly have it, and happy to provide it as you see fit. Again, some of the key takeaways there. I think the key takeaway is we are really focused on growing the goal in order for us to address some of our challenges, which is the low number of certified contractors that we have in the region to meet these goals. That's part of the outreach that our team is now doing is how do we work with people to educate them on the certification process? How do we find those areas where there's currently gaps, where there's more work out there than what we have providers for? And how do we grow people into those types of occupations and partner with the workforce development sector in order for us to make progress on that issue? And I know Jory's doing an amazing job creating those types of connections, but also it was acknowledged by Commissioner Beer, we have a national shortage of skilled trades workers. A lot of our trades in the area are making concerted efforts to recruit diverse workers in, and it obviously has a positive impact on their bottom line too, because it helps them on our projects.
Could we, oh, go ahead.
That's an important thing. I think if people listening at home, these trades, electricians, plumbers, carpenters, we need a lot more of these type of people to get into these trades, because we have a severe shortage in this area, I think across the United States, but in particular in Rochester, Minnesota, we're scrambling. We do not have enough of the trades.
Could I drill into that first bullet point for a second? It does strike me there's an opportunity here, because while Commissioner Beer's point is a super important one, and it takes a long time to reopen that pipeline that I think all have taken our eye off. I think collectively the whole country's waking up to this. This first bullet point is one that is something where we can move the dial, I believe, much more quickly. Do we have a strong enough database that we can provide that to our to people who come to us wanting to build projects? Do we have external partners who are keeping an eye on that and are helping to look for ways that we can help encourage working capital, all those other things? Do we know who's out there who could grow into this work?
I think we have a great sense of who's currently certified, where the gaps potentially are. And then I think it really is, how do we find the best way to connect with those that have the opportunity to either grow a business in an area that has the potential to be successful, and connect them with the resources that they need, whether it be workforce development, small business development center, any of these other folks that can really help people get capitalized and get in the pipeline. And then I think the next important step is getting the work, right? There's still a competitive process to get the work. And if people don't see that happening, then you don't have the opportunity to kind of grow parallel and meet these goals. So I do think we have developed some strategies to create education around the gaps. We've set up and are encouraging people to go through compliance. We're creating local options for people to be certified as opposed to having to go to the Twin Cities. And so I do think you're correct in that this is an area where we have the potential to make significant progress and have some strategies to do so.
If we were sitting in the cities, I would call up, well, actually Paul would be one who is a practitioner like this, and there are a number of, there's a strong ecosystem there. I'm not as frankly knowledgeable about what kind of a nonprofit ecosystem there is. And go ahead, Mayor.
Well, I would just say that, for the last several years, there have been efforts, particularly on the certification process for minority and women-owned businesses, excuse me, with the Chamber and some of our other organizations. We've held events, I've attended them at the Doubletree, that had a huge turnout of people. And I think part of it was to inform people about the certification process. Because sometimes people maybe had a small business, but they had not gotten themselves certified. So we've started that effort, and I think the point here is that we need to do more of that and continue, and I think Jory's doing some of that work. She's out there in the audience today. To try to continue that, because a one-time shot isn't enough. This is something we need to continue to work on so that we have that pool of certified businesses here right in town.
Mayor.
No, go ahead, Commissioner.
I'll give you a concrete example. I mean, as we're growing as a community, the Jeremiah project, that's targeted at women, single young women who have a high school education. I mean, we're building a facility out there where they have a dependent, a child or two, and we give them the education, work with them so that they can get into, a better job than maybe working at Quick Trip or something like that. And that's been, it's a continuing success story. We're building the building. I forget how many, do you remember, Mayor, how many we're going to have out there at the Jeremiah project? But it's a large facility. So these are things that are continuing to go. So I think we're making strides. But again, you can't just snap your fingers and have these happening. But I think we're headed in the right direction.
Your Honor, I think it'd be important now just to look at some of the things we've accomplished this last year, and then also talk about our 2020 plans, and I'll relate to you those larger goals that are out there on the last slide. So we're very proud to have a chapter of the National Association of Minority Contractors started this year, in large part due to the partnership of folks that are interested in that, but also, Jory's work, and she's also been catalyzing this collaborative with small businesses that really are focused on, growing the base of targeted businesses in Rochester. What do we plan to do in 2020? We're very much looking at trying to assess those gaps, as we talked about. Where is the most productive opportunities for people to start businesses? Continue to help with recruiting the women and minority workforce to start their own companies. So if you have people that are in the workforce and they want to take that next step, give them the capacity to do that. And then we also talked about hosting workshops to educate people and get certified and win contracts ultimately.
Yeah, just a quick on that. Go back. I know you guys are trying to move fast because we're asking so many questions.
I think we have time. I want to make sure we've got more time, and let's make sure we get this right. So take time.
So what I don't see, and maybe we already have a plan for this, is like ultimately starting businesses. The thing that the city and other government organizations can do is de-risk the situation. So we say capital, but really we're talking about de-risking, going and starting a business. I think having a plan that's cohesive with what are the different stakeholders going to do. I mean, it's risky in my position, in my vision, for the city to talk about leading an effort. What we want to do is help feed the effort. We want to, people that are out there that are willing to take the leadership position are going to want to do that regardless. And I think what we need to do is figure out how we build kind of the supportive infrastructure for that. The entire effort here will be boosted by having, our city will be bettered by having more people out there starting businesses, driving that stuff. What I am a little bit, what I'd like to see, and maybe this is still part of the plan, is how we're working to leverage existing organizations instead of building new frameworks. That to me has been one of the things historically watching, that it's been easier to build something new than to corral all the players that are out there working. Yet the city is actually really, really good at corralling people onto a plan. So what I'd like to see, I guess, that come back, and I think is fairly useful, is maybe a survey of what's out there that's happening, because I believe we have organizations that are working in some of these spots. And then two, what can DMC do legally to help financially de-risk the situations for these contractors that are taking on new opportunities. So.
Mayor?
Well, I'll just add two quick points to this. One, Susan Ronnie was in town yesterday, and we had an opportunity to talk to her. And she did talk about the challenges of being a small women-owned business and being so small that she was overlooked for contracts. And so I think either you or T or Paul, made this comment about how do you have the subcontractors, or how do you break down a project in order to include some of those smaller businesses. So I think that has to be part of our plan moving ahead. And also, I attended an event not too long ago, a graduation, if you will, of some, excuse me, I have a little bit of a cold, some local folks who have been through a training to get them job ready. And it was through workforce development and out at RCTC. And so some of our partners are thinking and working ahead of us in preparing that workforce that we're going to need. And then we're going to have to somehow in this community take that next step. Now we've got people trained. How do we get them in the organizations or starting organizations as Councilmember Campion was just mentioning. So I think there's some things going on. It's just building on that synergy and taking it to the next step that we need to really focus on this next year.
I would just, I think it's absolutely the case. And even where we have a robust ecosystem that you referenced earlier in the Twin Cities, it's still a heavy lift trying to build these businesses. So, I mean, it is a long-term effort, and I hear you saying that. You know, one of the things that I think is, I mean, there are organizations like MEDA, Metropolitan Economic Development Association, which is very much a small business development operation. I also think, again, our private sector development partners do this well in some other areas, and talking with them, actually, they might be able to give us some ideas of how they take that to scale in other places. So I just think that's part of the conversation in terms of talking to who else is out there and who knows, you know, some things already.
Right, and I want to pick up on Councilmember Campion's point about partnerships too. You know, I mentioned this super quickly, but let me give just a couple more sentences of detail. Before I got to Minneapolis Foundation, they created this working capital for small businesses. And it basically was an example of going to our donors and saying, we are now investing your dollars. How'd you like to get a little bit less in return so that you could loan that out to these small businesses? That worked. And now it's recirculating to other small businesses. But again, toward partnerships, the Minneapolis Foundation knows enough to know they don't know everything about this. So instead of them doing the loans, they worked with trusted intermediaries. I think PPL was one of them, but MEDA was one of them. And so that's the ecosystem that I think, and I do think this working capital piece is a big element, because the larger the project, the more working capital you need. The part we can control is, as I say, unbundle these larger projects into smaller or encourage coalitions and payment cycles. That this issue of long-time payment cycle does not sink a very large business, but it completely sinks a small business. They can't compete. So I think there are pieces like that. What I'm wondering about is how between meetings can we send the signal that we want to play some role in this. And I'm talking about the DMC, I'm talking about city, I'm talking about all of it. But I don't think this is the one we can lead, but I do think it's the one we can put a lot of wind in the sails. Who's leading this sort of work here locally? Or what table exists? And if not, how do we help?
Yeah, so chairman of the board, I think what's been exciting is we had exclusively before this year been dedicated to compliance. And that was really our effort at that point. And when we created this new project management framework,